CTV News special presentation.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you all. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Tonight,
We have been told in this pandemic to stay home, so that is exactly what we're doing tonight, working from home.
the top 10 of 2020 from the journalists who brought the stories to you.
Describe the year in one word.
Awful,
Unexpected.
Crazy. Surreal. Chaotic.
heartbreaking,
Humbling.
Relentless.
Ghastly.
Long.
Never ending.
Abomination.
Over.
CTV National News at Home, 2020 Year in Review. Reporting tonight, here is Lisa LaFlamme.
Gang, this year, more than any other, we were pretty much unanimous on the #1 story of the year. So let's start with the pandemic. Before it was even called COVID-19, it was coronavirus. No one is getting in or out of one of China's largest cities tonight. Wuhan, the center of a mysterious coronavirus outbreak, took a drastic measure today.
You know, like the apocalypse, healthcare workers dressed in full-on hazmat suits, entire massive cities silent, something that seemed could never happen, which again we saw happening around the world in months to come.
I remember seeing over Christmas, what's this? Because we know these little embers somewhere else in the world can be a problem for the rest of the world pretty quickly. We saw it with SARS, we saw it with H1N1, and so I watched that and I said in January to our assignment editor, Mark, we need to do a story on whatever's happening over there.
Since late December, dozens of people in the city of Wuhan in central China began developing fever and difficulty breathing.
I think we had a sense that we were on the cusp of something, but I don't think we just realized how significant or how big this pandemic would be. Even when I got to Japan and Yokohama to report on that story about the Diamond Princess, this is the first time in my career that I've traveled for a story and I haven't been able to physically speak to somebody face to face.
We don't know exactly how and when we're getting out of here.
All of these conversations were done via Zoom, not very far from the ship. I could see it in front of me. And so it changed the reporting and obviously for the months that followed changed so much more.
And then we watched the virus as it swept across Europe into northern Italy, where the numbers of people dying was quite horrendous.
When we started seeing people dying and not having any dignity in death and not having any family members by their side, cemeteries were full, the army came in.
Into France, into Spain, and then across into the United Kingdom, which was about 2 weeks behind the rest of Europe. Cameraman David Iacolucci and I decided that we should start working from home because it was supposed to be safer. So on a Friday afternoon, we locked the office door, not sure when we were going to see each other again, more ominously, not sure if we would see each other again. It became real in the UK when Boris Johnson came down with COVID-19.
Alas, I still have one of the symptoms, a minor symptom of, I still have a temperature.
And then all of a sudden he was taken to the hospital, and then all of a sudden he was in intensive care.
But before Boris Johnson, there was Prince Charles.
Luckily, with relatively mild symptoms.
And then there was his son, Prince William, Brazil's leader, Jair Bolsonaro, the US President, Donald Trump, of course. And then in December, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, tested positive. This virus, as we know, does not discriminate.
You know, on a personal level, I was on maternity leave, but I had also my partner who got COVID very early on. And I remember very distinctly panicking and calling Avis and saying, should I be making my will here? I don't know what is going on.
It just gives me goosebumps, really, to think about all of the unknowns at that time.
Tell me how many tests you would be dealing with here.
Oh, it's thousands of tests.
I keep thinking about the fact that when I was in Geneva, February 11th, where the World Health Organization announced what the name of this disease would be. And I remember sitting in the room and we're all taking notes. They're spelling it out, COVID. And now you think, how could we possibly have to write down this name now? It's so ubiquitous, of course.
And of course, so many questions have come out since then. given the allegations of the WHO, working in tandem with China in a way of not challenging them on when the first cases were.
Why did they wait so long to call it a pandemic?
Well, you know, Lisa, that's going to be a question that a lot of people ask, why they waited so long, because these viruses, they travel and they spread, and so you cannot contain them, they move. But it was quite clear. We had cases in Canada by the end of January. You could see it popping up.
It was January 25th that the first case was reported here in Canada.
The man in his 50s is in isolation at this Toronto hospital.
We were still all being told the risk to the public was low.
So here in BC, we had one of the first long-term care outbreaks.
The man was in his 80s, had underlying health issues, and was one of at least 4 people at the home to test positive for the novel coronavirus.
When we think back to the very beginning, it really was the province of Quebec that seemed hardest hit.
We were feeding people until 9:30 at night, you know, so they could eat. No, everybody was crying. We had no employees.
Those first few months in those long-term care homes really took people by surprise. People started to die, people started to get very sick, and people working in those homes just simply had nowhere to turn to. When the military, when the army walked in, it did help. This was a sigh of relief in many of those homes, but certainly the descriptions of those nights that they spent 2 nurses on the floor when there usually would be 20, 40 times that number, and just trying to help elderly people in those homes, those descriptions are just horrifying.
Do you remember the battle for PPEs? That became a hugely political hot potato. They didn't even want to tell people to wear masks when they knew that masks were probably lifesavers because there weren't any.
We have 5-day supply left of just the simple surgical face mask.
Over 1,000, 5,000. The virus has now taken more than 10,000 Canadians. These people are not statistics.
And I can't just give her a big hug.
I remember as a team, we made a decision very early on that we did not want to get into a trap of just doing the numbers, and that we needed to tell the stories of the people who were suffering, who were surviving, who were not surviving, and the stories of those who were trying to help people survive.
It's the ward where no one wants to end up.
I actually had to take myself to Emerge one day because the anxiety was giving me chest pain.
These are doctors who are used to having the answers. They didn't know whether they were going to get sick. They didn't know how to treat people.
It's the first time I've ever treated a patient where I'm afraid of getting a disease from the patient.
Among the severely ill COVID patients in the ICU today is a young man so sick his ventilator is turned on high.
I've never seen doctors and nurses who are afraid. They were afraid to come to work. I saw nurses with shopping bags on their feet. There were no PPEs. They were putting their lives on the line to take care of sick people.
What has become tragically apparent, this virus has disproportionately impacted racialized communities.
We've had deaths of migrant workers as well as infections spreading on and off farms.
I mean, they're the people that put our fruits and vegetables, our potatoes, on our tables.
Gabriel Flores survived the virus. He spoke to reporters about their crowded living conditions, but says he was fired for doing so.
50 people shared one bathroom. One bathroom for 50 people in COVID. Imagine what that is like. And there was a massive spread of the infection.
Many remote First Nation communities are struggling with rising COVID cases since there is little to no access to adequate health services.
Anytime there's a health crisis, First Nations people on reserve are at a disadvantage. There's disadvantages with clean drinking water, disadvantages with access to health care, disadvantages with access to food, healthy food so that they can eat every day.
Please stay home.
Stay home.
Stay home.
Stay home.
We need to stay the Blazes home.
I remember asking officials about closing the borders and being told time and time again, this is a virus, it knows no borders. Why would we close the borders? And boom, our border with the United States is closed. And then there was that daily news conference with a prime minister who was self-isolating after his wife, Sophie Grégoire Trudeau, caught it, and then Erin O'Toole, the leader of the official opposition, and then Yves-François Blanchet. That's when it starts hitting home, when people have it.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens when the vaccine is available, the whole vaccine distribution in Canada.
As we move into the new year, we're going to see how quickly, not the first shots go in, but how fast we get to the point where enough people are being vaccinated that we can start reopening again.
We've never seen anything like this. Normally vaccines take a decade, and you're looking from beginning to end in 10 months. So it's amazing, and it shows you what can happen when science really is given a target and said, go.
Anastasia Tabanos is trying to stay upbeat about her new office at home and tiny coworker.
I'm sure we'll get into a rhythm. It's just, right now, it's all very new, so.
Back in early March, we'd never heard of Zoom. It wasn't widely known. Of course, it became the saving grace for so many, the way that people were able to work from home.
They may have taken.
I think when schools shut down back in the spring, many parents learned very quickly that they were not born to be teachers.
One thing I think may have come as a shock to everyone was this compulsion for Canadians to panic buy toilet paper.
Lisa, we're beginning to see it again. People loading up with the giant rolls of toilet paper and the wipes, and it's just like going back to the early stages of this pandemic.
Toilet paper does not cure COVID. I thought there's a first for everything. It wasn't true in the first wave, and it's not true in the second.
Still ahead.
This is just an absolutely massive expansion of Canada's social safety net like we've never seen before.
And later.
When 2020 started, I was a brunette.
CTV National News with Lisa LaFlamme.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. For me personally, sleep was not even on my radar. It didn't even matter. Hello, and thank you for joining us on this Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, this Sunday morning. Wow, there were so many amazing interviews in the morning show. I'm thinking of Brian Fraser in Ottawa going through chemotherapy, helping Canadians better understand why just because of a pandemic, it did not mean stop giving blood.
The thing about donating blood is that it's, even without this virus going on, it's one of those things, it's always needed.
We saw a lot of beautiful characters in this country shine through during our darkest days of the pandemic.
I don't see people rushing back to spend money that they don't have.
It's heartbreaking, frankly, to see so many businesses that have closed, right across the country. Behind every business is a family, multiple families.
They didn't know if they'd be able to make their rent. Many small-time landlords had a situation where, people weren't paying rent for months and months and months.
So many restaurants, well, they had to pivot to do takeout. They had to pivot to do, sort of delivery.
The airline industry has really taken a big hit, not just here in Canada, but around the world. In the meantime, of course, there are a lot of Canadians who had travel booked. They're still waiting for some type of refund.
An even bigger economic hit brought down the price of oil.
That's my livelihood, and that's what puts my food on the table and the house over my children's head.
The fortunes of Albertans are very closely tied to oil and gas, whether they work in the industry or not. Layoffs in the oil patch hit Alberta hard on so many different levels.
Our government has a $9 billion plan to help students, $30 billion in interest-free loans, an additional $1.1 billion, $1.7 billion, $12.5 billion to help small and medium-sized businesses.
This is just an absolutely massive expansion of Canada's social safety net like we've really never seen before.
So many of the government programs were set up to try to help different segments of society. One of them was to help students, and that led to the whole, what became known as the WE scandal in this country.
I made a mistake in not recusing myself.
That's why I'll be stepping down as Finance Minister.
The collapse of Canada's largest children's charity.
This is a charity from which members of the Prime Minister's own family have benefited. They have taken money for speaking fees.
We Charity would have been a bigger story had it not been for the pandemic. Listen, in December 2019, the projected deficit was $28 billion. Fast forward to December 2020, and the projected deficit in the worst case scenario.
Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland extended certain emergency benefits.
$400 billion. $28 billion, $400 billion. And that deficit is all about COVID-19.
The worst mass shooting in modern Canadian history.
It lasted more than 12 hours and covered nearly 100 kilometers. We now know 22 innocent people were killed.
RCMP identified the gunman on Twitter.
Why wasn't the public alerted to that?
Lisa was an incredible educator and the best mom possible.
She loved poetry. She loved enjoying life and making the best out of things.
And the thing I remember most is how much we laughed about everything.
When he cowardly, extremely cowardly, took my wife's life and our unborn baby.
Oh, I didn't know. I did not know she was pregnant, Nick. Honestly,
we never got to tell family. We were going to tell them this week she was on vacation.
Oh.
And we were going to, our son Daxton was going to wear a shirt and let everybody know. And
you know, for me, in 33 years as a journalist, I don't think anything compares to that moment. Speaking with Nick Beaton that day.
We, of course, are naturally sympathetic and very sensitive to the families of victims. But more often than not, they want to get the stories out. They want to talk. Mm-hmm. You know, they are hurting over this Christmas holiday. You know, there's been a lot of sorrow, as you mentioned, across the country, but it's hard to imagine anywhere more so than in Nova Scotia. And then to have to mourn and grieve through isolation that we were in at that time, it's truly remarkable.
Good evening. At the end of a year that has hurt like an open wound, the pain-piercing Nova Scotia tonight is almost too much to bear. These are the 6 men who were on board a fishing boat now lost at sea.
The ocean takes people. You never know when it's going to happen.
This is set against, of course, what has been a disastrous year for the people in province of Nova Scotia. You think back to April with Canada's worst mass shooting, and then a few weeks later there was a downing of the military helicopter in the Mediterranean.
Good evening. This was the kind of day military families dread. 6 members of the Canadian Forces were taking part in a NATO training mission when their helicopter crashed.
And then a Nova Scotian who was killed in the crash of a snowbird's jet.
What?
He just crashed.
Oh my God!
Captain Jennifer Casey, the public face of the snowbirds, also ejected but did not survive.
People would like to see the end of this year and certainly hoping that 2021 looks nothing like this.
One moment that really struck me, that last video that Sub-Lieutenant Abigail Cobra posted of her tribute for the shooting victims in her beloved Nova Scotia. And Emily Tuck, the youngest victim in the shooting, heartbreaking and also powerful to see Natalie McMaster help her get through that piece of music.
It resonates. People still talk about it.
when we come back.
It was just a smorgasbord of insults flying.
The question is, Justice, radical left, will you shut up, man?
And later,
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle decided to go it alone in 2020.
Good evening. The fire drill is over. In just over 7 weeks, it spread to 120 countries.
It's been like a war zone, a medical war zone.
If you have any face masks, supplies, please consider donating them.
All the patients in this room, all the feet that you see, they all have COVID.
Today is kind of getting worse and worse. We had to get a refrigerated truck to store the bodies.
As the U.S. set a new world record tonight, more than 250,000 Americans have now died in this pandemic. Every single day in the United States seems to bring just a shocking new number of infections and deaths because of this virus. Did any of you ever imagine it would spiral this far out of control?
I think there's great difficulty for all of us, even now, in imagining it, because the terrible human cost here, I mean, we have these enormous numbers, but they feel abstract. And the reality is that every one of those numbers, every person, is another irreplaceable and unique individual.
I think when the outbreak first hit and there were these graphic images of graves being dug up just outside of Manhattan, that really hit home. And you could tell that this country was not prepared for it.
And the most perplexing thing is it didn't have to be this bad. I mean, we now have hospitals that are overrun, nurses in tears. It's almost like the trauma of 9/11 every single day because it's just not getting any better.
And yet the resistance and defiance, even to wearing masks.
Open up California now.
This is an absolute abuse of power.
It's created a battle over whether people should even do the right thing. I mean, the freedom to do something stupid is not a good argument for doing something stupid. And yet we have seen that in this country. Mask wearing was politicized. It became an emblem of political identity.
The toughest part of trying to comprehend the final year of this Trump presidency is the administration's inability to work together with his medical team, including Dr. Fauci, but taking all the credit for the development of the vaccine.
For Donald Trump, the pandemic and his messaging really was the beginning of the end of his presidency.
It was all bullshit.
Surviving his impeachment trial, Donald Trump celebrated the acquittal by going back on the attack.
By these radical left lunatics, I get impeached.
Who the heck does he think he is?
Sleazebag, scum. Nancy Pelosi is a horrible person.
You're impeached forever. You're never getting rid of that scar.
The president's prescription, he suggested injecting patients with disinfectants.
Is there a way we can do something like that? By injection inside or almost a cleaning. One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear. We're rounding the curve. I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
I mean, he's a super spreader.
He's offering nothing but failure and delusion.
Biden's a stupid person, you know that.
The people of this nation have spoken. They've delivered us a clear victory.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
Richard, there were so many afternoon story meetings this year, and you'd call in and use the word bonkers. We should have taken up a collection every time you told us about a bonkers development in the campaign.
Well, yeah, Lisa, I can tell you, this has been an administration that has just thrived on instability and chaos and uncertainty, from impeachment to protests to, of course, this long drawn-out election. It's just been one heck of a year.
And then that night when we learned the President of the United States tested positive for COVID, we didn't get confirmation, Joy, until late at night. I remember you and I were emailing back and forth. Could the president really have COVID?
I get tweets from Donald Trump. It's the first thing I wake up to. It's the last thing I look at. And he put out a tweet saying that he had been exposed to COVID. It was shocking. But they were very cagey. Was he given oxygen? Was he on a ventilator? They didn't really say. And then, of course, he decides he's going to go out to show his supporters that he's okay, and he's not wearing a mask. He is still modeling bad behavior.
To have this campaign going on in the middle of a pandemic really made this an election unlike any other, even before you got to the personality issues of Donald Trump.
Let's talk about the debates. That first one really summed up just how nasty this campaign was going to be.
It was one step short of baying at the moon.
It was just a smorgasbord of insults flying.
The question is, radical left. Will you shut up, man? Listen. Keep yapping, man.
But then there was a moment where it came up to Donald Trump, will you condemn white supremacists? And he said the most stunning thing.
Supremacists and white supremacists and right Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
It was shocking that he still wouldn't condemn far-right extremist groups in this country, and I think it turned people against Donald Trump.
And Joy, as much as Donald Trump takes the oxygen in the room, 2020 was also a remarkable political comeback for Joe Biden.
Donald Trump knew Joe Biden would be the one guy that would be very difficult to beat in a presidential election. The whole reason why he got impeached, he tried to withhold military aid to Ukraine, contingent on finding some kind of dirt on Joe Biden and his son Hunter.
It was the vice presidential debate, though, when Kamala Harris really owned the moment.
He said he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Well, wait.
I'm speaking.
It'd be important if you said the truth.
If you don't mind letting me finish, we can then have a conversation, okay?
Please.
Okay.
Something that Kamala Harris said when Joe Biden chose her that sticks with me. And she said, there's a lot of little girls out there that are looking at me and they see themselves in me, that this is what you can do in a place called America.
But who knew weeks would go by with no concession speech and the president calling it rigged?
So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Not a single Republican has been able to look at any one of these mail ballots.
Every judge has tossed out this lawsuit.
USA! USA! And the year really ends with America just as divided as it started.
What's that saying that the Queen says? The year, the annus horribilis?
In America, politicians don't take power. People grant power to them. And we now know nothing, not even a pandemic or an abuse of power, can extinguish that flame.
As far as heroes go, it was the creativity of so many that inspired me throughout this. Mike Stevens, though, stands out for me, arguably the world's best harmonica player. And at the start of the pandemic, he reached out to tell me that he'd put all call out there through his charity to get all the kids he'd met on First Nations reserves who he'd given harmonicas to play together a piece he called My Life is Bigger Than COVID-19. It's so beautiful, and I listen to it all the time when I need strength.
Coming up.
This was a man who finally felt he needed to speak his truth.
And later.
No way! Oh, okay. There are fractures in the thin blue line in Minneapolis tonight. 4 officers were fired today after video of a brutal arrest showed one cop kneeling on the neck of an unarmed black man who ultimately died.
What's his name? George Floyd! What's his name? George Floyd! Everybody in the world needs to be watching this. The world, please watch this. I can't breathe!
This is like a war zone in front of our eyes right now.
Black Lives Matter. George Floyd! Say his name! George Floyd!
We want justice for Daniel Prude.
Say his name!
It was a moment of reckoning. So many people I spoke with discussed having the talk with their young black teenage children. What happens when you get pulled over by a white police officer? And you really had a sense that there's this frustration hit a boiling point.
You just got to stand up sometimes and say, you know what, no more, enough, tired.
There were protests in Germany, in Switzerland, in France, but in the UK, it was on a different level. I remember going into central London and hearing a woman who was preparing her sign saying to her nephew, "I can't believe I still have to do this."
The day that Ottawa had their protest, and I went down and I was just floored. I mean, tens of thousands of people that lined the streets.
People weren't hiding in the shadows anymore. Indigenous voices were raised with the black voices in places like Winnipeg.
We all watched that cell phone video of the police takedowns of Indigenous men.
We heard a commissioner who at first didn't acknowledge that there was racism in the force. Police in general have had to look inwards.
If we look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, their calls for better relationships between police and Indigenous people. I know there's a lot of police stations across the country making the efforts, reaching out to their community members, getting more representation, but more needs to be done.
One of the stories of the year that is just seared into my mind and so many others is the death of Joyce Eshequan in that hospital in Joliet, Quebec.
You could hear Joyce's cries. She's screaming in pain. There were protests as a result. The premier insists that there is no systemic racism in the province. And so that is a huge disappointment to Indigenous leaders here.
Carrying us through the conversation were voices from the past sharing their own truths, their lived truths. And I'm thinking of that interview with Hal Johnson.
The higher-ups said because they already have a black reporter, they don't want to have two black reporters. I think in the boardrooms, the people that make the decisions, they have to have more diversity.
It is remarkable. He felt comfortable and safe enough and felt compelled to share this story. This was a man who finally felt he needed to speak his truth in order to get a better sense of understanding.
It seemed there were so many huge international stories in 2020.
Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor are in Chinese cells with lights on 24/7.
At its core, this is still about two men who have not been with their families for 2 years.
Every day I worry for Michael's health, particularly mental health.
On a day of deep and profound grief, the crash of Ukrainian Air Flight 752. Everyone on board was killed, including 138 passengers with ties to Canada.
I don't know how I can describe losing a child. What happened to my daughter and my granddaughter? But I deserve to know. All of us, we deserve to know. What happened to our beloved one?
I can't even explain. I'm waiting for him. Open the door. Come in, come in.
The evidence indicates that the plane was shot down by an Iranian surface-to-air missile.
That was a shocking moment. I mean, we saw the footage, we saw the missile strike.
January the 8th is the terrible day, and I've spoken to the families, and they're dreading that moment. In the days before this airplane was shot down by anti-aircraft in Tehran, there had been a terrible amount of tension. The Americans had taken out the most important Iranian general in a drone strike. Shortly after that, Iran dropped some rockets on an American base, injuring people. So in that huge tension, that's when this Ukrainian airliner was shot down, hit with 2 missiles by Iranian forces. It took 3 days for Iran to admit that that was exactly what happened. Yes, it shot down the airplane, but it was unintentional.
We didn't really have any kind of diplomatic channel to express how outraged Canadians were about it, as well as getting access to the investigation. You remember the whole drama about trying to get access to the black boxes, the flight recorders, which the Iranians impeded. Finally, some Canadians were able to get access and participate in that investigation. The focus now, though, of course, is making sure that Iran pays compensation for the Canadians who were aboard that flight.
They are determined, however, not just to get compensation. It's not just about getting money for the tragedy that they've gone through. They want to show that there are criminals inside, that they want these people brought before an international tribunal and put on trial. These are families that had dual nationality, and they went back to Iran often to see family, and they paid a tremendous price for that, caught in somebody else's war.
When we return,
a tragedy has befallen the world of basketball.
Kobe's been there for us for 20 years plus.
Well, quite simply, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle decided to go it alone in 2020.
An extraordinary royal departure.
The Queen had made it pretty clear they couldn't be half in and half out of royal life, so they packed up their bags, they packed up their son Archie, and moved to California. There were rumors in the summertime that Harry was struggling with his new life.
The Duchess of Sussex revealed today in the New York Times that she suffered a miscarriage.
It was a sad period for both of them.
We're going to be hanging out inside and waiting for the next air evac.
Canada has sent more than 100 firefighters here to Australia.
This little fellow, he's too far gone.
I remember we were flying into the Melbourne International Airport, and all of a sudden I could smell burning smoke and I couldn't see anything. The entire city of Melbourne was covered in this really thick smoke. One of the most surreal experiences was driving through one of the neighborhoods that had been hardest hit by the fire. It completely charred forests and charred farmers' fields and homes that had been burnt down.
Every single year we cover wildfires in Canada and in the United States. This year, though, Tom, the fire season on the U.S. West Coast at least started earlier and ended later. How much of that is being blamed on climate change?
Well, most of it, Lisa. I mean, there's really no dispute here in California. The California state government looks at this as a clear consequence of climate change. The shock here is that it wasn't a bigger story this year with the amount of destruction there was because of fire.
A special gift that he got for learning to ride his bike.
Everything I've ever owned, all my memories, stuff from my family is just all gone.
We had the smoke from those devastating wildfires come into BC, and you could feel it in your throat, you could feel it in your eyes. It was dense, it was thick, you couldn't see the sun.
One of the enduring images for me of the year, Canada's last fully intact ice shelf, 40% of it gone into the ocean. And the hurricanes, such a busy year for hurricanes.
30 named storms, all of this evidence pointing to the very real and present consequences of climate change.
South of 101 helicopter went down.
Unfortunately, all on board were determined to have been perished.
A tragedy has befallen the world of basketball.
Kobe's been there for us for 20 years and plus.
Amazing grace, how
Kobe was my dear friend. He was like a little brother.
That really was one of those where were you when kind of moments. To be there at the crash site in Calabasas and see the steady procession of people. This felt like a pilgrimage of people very sincerely wanting to pay their respects and express their grief for Kobe Bryant.
This has been such an unprecedented year overall, and pro sports is no exception. It was as if the moment the NBA went dark, called off the game that very night, that things got real and the lockdowns all sort of followed within days.
The game tonight has been postponed.
Every league did take a different approach. You had the National Hockey League in bubbles in Toronto and Edmonton, where they had all the players go in.
The National Hockey League has returned. Sit back and enjoy the Stanley Cup qualifiers.
The NBA did the same thing in Florida. The NFL and baseball, they refused to go into bubbles. Of course, the Toronto Blue Jays were not allowed to play their home games in Canada.
There are a couple of inspiring sports figures that come to mind for me in 2020. First of all, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. He wins the Super Bowl last season, then he sits out the season because, of course, he's a doctor. So he traded in his uniform and cleats for medical scrubs. And I think a lot of people were touched by that, especially in his home province of Quebec. And Danielle, tell us about the great Alphonso Davies.
He is the most talked about Canadian athlete in Europe. This all started in a refugee camp in Ghana where he was born, and then wound up in Edmonton where he continued to play football, and the next thing you know, he's playing in Vancouver, and then 2 years ago was drafted to Germany, where he has won 5 trophies with the team and is currently the most sought-after player in his position.
Jamie Webster. This is a woman who is dying of cancer. She decided to stop treatment and start working on her bucket list. She created 11 hampers for 11 families, reached out to the community, and asked for help, and was able to deliver those hampers early in December.
I get to be Mrs. Claus and bring these hampers to families. Save a neighborhood. Check.
And coming up next.
Of all the stories we have told on CTV National News, do you know what got the most viewer response? Any guesses? All right, how did the pandemic change my life? How did the pandemic change all of our lives? For me, personally, when 2020 started, I was a brunette. Yes, it's the stress of the pandemic, but most importantly, it was the lockdown of my colorist salon. So I was spraying the roots for months during the early days of the pandemic, and I finally said, why bother? I'm going gray. Honestly, if I had known the lockdown could be so liberating on that front, I would have done it a lot sooner.
I think, in fact, I put on the COVID-19. I honestly think I've gained at least 19 or 20 pounds this year, and many Canadians have said that they did gain weight because, of course, people turned to comfort foods.
I actually had a throat swab, and I made a horrible gagging noise on the national news, which our cameras, of course, recorded.
That was unpleasant.
We have a new tool on the job now, and that's a really long mic pole.
I think my all-time favorite on that, a microphone duct taped onto the end of a hockey stick to maintain physical distancing. From my heart, I want to thank you for your journalism and your work ethic in this incredibly difficult 2020. That being said, and at the risk of getting emotional, of all the stories we have told on CTV National News, do you know what got the most viewer response? Any guesses? If you said your pets, you would be correct. Okay, so this is their moment. I've got my brood here, including my own pandemic puppy, Barney, a baby bro for Toby. So if yours is nearby, let's show them off again.
Hang on a second.
Sorry, did you say pets? Did I do a story on pets?
Can we get Hartley down here?
Okay, hold on.
Oh, you want to grab them?
Okay, hold on. Come here.
Yes. You can probably hear him already.
Hang on a second. I have a way of getting...
Here, he's coming for a Dorito, which he's not going to have.
So let me introduce you to Sam, although he's no stranger to CTV.
Oh, Tibby. Tibbs. You say hi. There's Tibbs.
Here he is. Yeah, he loves the spotlight.
Well, Steve's in a box.
I've got to go get her.
He's been on the air, he's been on the website.
Wilson doesn't like making eye contact with people that he doesn't know, but he won't be able to tell that you all are out there.
Tibbs, can you come here? Come here. Come here. No, she's very happy.
See, I feel bad because Steve's not going to be part of this.
Oh, this is Fisher.
She's not usually allowed on the couch, so she's like, I'm not moving from this spot.
There we go. There we go.
This is tofu.
Mr. Freely, he'll just kind of run around in circles.
Look, Fish, look. Say hi. Hi to Canada.
Okay, I'm back. Her name is Skin, and you'll know why in a second.
She's working out pretty good. Lulu's not really happy about it.
Well, this is Steve, and this is Bill, and they have been loving the pandemic because we've been home so much.
But she's a good girl. Cuddly.
My husband took the pictures of my dogs waiting for me in front of my office door.
And she doesn't like TV. Off you go, girl.
Hey, buddy. Yeah.
No way. Oh, okay.
He's our pandemic baby. He's 5 months old.
Look at his little boat.
His name's Levon. He was born July 13th at 7 pounds, 2 ounces. So he's a pretty big pet right from the start, eh?
Wow. You never have to teach him to fetch. He's beautiful. He's absolutely beautiful. You win for 2020.